am attorney Marie-Chris Bathan-Lasco. This is my virtual classroom. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this channel, I shall aim to simplify the law. I will discuss concepts and principles of law in under 10 minutes. Hello again. Welcome back to MBL Classroom. Now, in two of my videos, I have already talked about what the role of your board of directors and your board of trustees are in a stock or in a non-stock corporation. In another video also, we have talked about the term of office of the directors or the trustees. And we have also talked about the qualifications of becoming a director or a trustee. In this video, I want us to talk about the election of the directors and trustees. How is that conducted? How is the election conducted? So let's begin. Your section 23 of your revised corporation code actually tells you what will happen in an election and what are the requisites before the election can actually take place. Let's read the particular paragraph of section 23. It says, at all elections of directors or trustees, there must be present either in person or through a representative authorized to act by written proxy, the owners of majority of the outstanding capital stock, or if there be no capital stock, a majority of the members entitled to vote. That particular paragraph in section 23 actually tells you of the number that is required to be present for you to be able to hold elections in a stock corporation and in a non-stock corporation. In that particular paragraph, it is important that we understand what a quorum is and how we apply that in the election of your directors or trustees. So in an election of directors or trustees, there must be a quorum. What is a quorum? It is the minimum number required to be able to conduct legitimate business. In an election of directors or trustees, it is the minimum required to be present, to be able to have an election. So, what is the quorum required in a stock corporation? It is, according to your section 23 of your revised corporation code, it is majority of the outstanding capital stock. What do we mean by majority? That is 1/2 plus 1. And your section 23 also tells you that the basis is ownership. In other words, you do not count the number of stockholders. Rather, you look at the ownership. What do we mean by this? Let me give you an illustration. So, for example, this stockholder has 30% ownership or 30% stake in the stock holdings of the corporation. And then you have this stockholder having 25% ownership. And then you have several other stockholders having minimal ownership, totaling 45% ownership. Now, your section 23 tells you that to determine the majority who must be present in the election, for them to be able to have such election, it must be majority of the outstanding capital stock. Again, we look at the ownership and not the number of people to determine majority. So in that illustration, the stockholder owning 30% and the stockholder owning 25%, even if they're the only two who are present in the election can actually already go on because they are the owners of majority of the outstanding capital stock. Now, do they actually need to be present? in the election, your Section 23 says they can be either in person or they can authorize someone. They can authorize a representative through a written proxy who can represent them. The same as those who would want to participate. Again, either in person or by written proxy. Again, when we determine the quorum to be able to hold the elections, we look at the ownership. In other words, if these two, having the 30% and the 25% ownership, if they are not present in the election, even if the rest are there, those constituting 45% ownership, they cannot hold the elections because they do not constitute the majority of the outstanding capital stock. That is how we determine the majority in a stock corporation. How about in a non-stock corporation? How do we determine the majority? Remember, in a non-stock corporation, there is no share. There are, however, members. You do not call them stockholders again because they do not own shares. So supposing, look at this illustration, you have 20 members in a non-stock corporation. How do we determine the majority? The same, 1/2 plus 1. But this time, because there is no outstanding capital stock and we only have members, then we count the number of members. What is 1/2 of 20? That is 10. But we said majority is 1/2 plus 1. So the majority then is 11 members out of 20. They must be present to constitute a quorum to be able to have the elections. That is how we determine the majority in a non-stock corporation. So that is how you determine a quorum. Again, you have to have a quorum first before you can proceed with the election. Now, if you are in a quorum, so you proceed with the election. How do we vote? What is the basis for voting? And what are the different methods of casting your vote? In a stock corporation, because you are a shareholder, the basis for voting is your ownership. In other words, if you have 5 shares, then you are entitled to 5 votes multiplied by the number of directors to be elected. In other words, if there are, let's say, 10 seats or 10 directors to be elected, and you have 5 shares of stock in that corporation, then you have 5 multiplied by 10 equal to 50 votes. So you are entitled 50 votes. That is the basis for computing the number of votes that you can cast in a stock corporation. Another example, let's say you have 100 shares of stock in the corporation and you are to choose or elect 10 directors. How many votes are you entitled to cast? Again, look at the number of shares that you have multiplied by the number of directors to be elected. So you have 100 shares multiplied by 10 equal 1,000. So 1,000 votes you will be entitled to cast. That is how you determine the number of votes that you are entitled to cast in the election of directors in a stock corporation. How about in non-stock corporations? How about election of trustees? You do not have shares of stock. There is no stock. So the basis now would be you being a member. So you being a member, you're entitled to 1 multiplied by the number of trustees to be elected. So if there are 10 trustees to be elected, then that's 1 times 10 equals your 10 votes. So you are entitled to 10 votes. So that is how you compute the votes that you may cast in a non-stock corporation. Now, what are the different methods of casting your vote? There are generally 3. I will just talk about the simple way by which you cast your vote in an election. So there are 3, as I've mentioned. What are these 3 methods? You have straight voting, cumulative voting in favor of one candidate, and cumulative voting by distribution. So these are the 3 methods. Let's talk about each one. What is straight voting? Straight voting happens when you equally distribute the number of votes that you are entitled to cast to the directors that you are voting for. So supposing you are to cast or to elect rather 10 directors out of 15 who have been nominated. So if you have 100 shares in that corporation and you are to elect 10 directors, as we have already mentioned earlier, that's 100 times 10. That is equal to 1,000 votes that you may cast. Now again, you are to elect 10 directors. And in our example, there are 15 nominees. So you will choose 10 out of the 15. And from those whom you were already able to choose, the 10, your 1,000 votes will be equally distributed among them. So 1,000 votes divided by 10 directors that you are choosing to elect out of the 15. So each of the 10 that you have chosen will get 100 votes each. How about cumulative voting in favor of one candidate? Again, we go back to computing how many votes you're entitled to cast. So again, if you have 100 shares and you are to elect 10 directors out of 15, if you follow cumulative voting in favor of one candidate, that means that you will have to choose only one out of the 15 who are being nominated. So again, how many votes? Still, you go back to your number of shares multiplied by the number of directors that has to be elected. So you have your 100 shares multiplied by 10. That's 1,000 votes. Now, instead of distributing it equally among the 10 out of the 15 that you would have chosen under straight voting, in cumulative voting in favor of one candidate, you accumulate all the 1,000 votes that you are entitled to cast to only one candidate. So you put in all your 1,000 votes to just one. Now, why is this made available under your revised corporation code? This is made available so that your minority stockholders will have a chance to have a representation. They can put in all their votes to one of their nominee so that they are given a chance to be represented in the board. Now, how about cumulative voting by distribution? Still the same. You first look into how much votes are you entitled to cast. Again, you have 100 shares multiplied by the number of directors to be elected. So let's say still 10 directors, and then there are 15 vying for the position. So you choose 10 out of the 15. Now, you have to compute again your 100 shares multiplied by 10 directors. Again, that gives you 1,000 votes. Then, cumulative voting by distribution would tell you that you will distribute it in the way that you would want it to be distributed. So, let's say, for example, you have chosen 10 out of the 15. The 1,000 votes, you can distribute it in a way where Perhaps one director will get 200 votes, one director will get 50 votes, another director will get 400 votes, and so on and so forth, so long as you only cast up until your 1,000 votes. So that is cumulative voting by distribution. Now, how do we determine who won the election? Who do we determine which would be considered now as the directors or trustees after an election is over? You look at the plurality of votes. In other words, the highest number of votes. It's just like our election for senators. The senator does not need to get majority votes, but you determine who are the winners by looking at the highest 10 votes if you are to elect 10 directors or 10 trustees to the board. So again, you look at those who have garnered the highest number of votes. Now, we have already talked about the methods of voting. But how do you actually cast your vote? Do you have to be present when you cast your vote? Not necessarily. This is a new amendment. This is an amendment to the revised Corporation Code allowing remote voting or voting in absentia. For purposes of determining a quorum, they are considered as present. Voting through remote communication or in absentia is allowed when it is authorized by the bylaws, or if it's not in the bylaws, it is approved by majority of the board of directors. Such requirement, however, that it must be authorized by the bylaws or approved by majority of the board of directors, such requirement is not necessary in corporations vested with public interest. What do we mean then? This means that even if it's not in the bylaws, even if it's not approved by majority of the board, your stockholders in corporations vested with public interest can actually, or rather are entitled to remote voting. So that's it for this video. I hope you understand now at least the general concept of how an election is done in the election of directors or trustees in a stock or non-stock corporation. I hope you have learned something from this video, and I will see you in the next. So if you find this video helpful, please click like, subscribe, and that notification bell so that you will be notified of new video uploads. Thank you for watching. See you next time in MBL Classroom.